A mother races through Penn Station's chaos as her lost daughter faces kidnappers, guarded by a fearless dog. Like, subscribe and hit the bell to catch our latest heart-pounding stories. The screech of metal wheels drowned out Emily Carter's scream as she stumbled onto the tracks of Penn Station, the oncoming train's headlights blinding her. "Sophie," she shrieked, her voice swallowed by the roar of the subway tunnel. The crowd above surged, oblivious, their footsteps thundering like a storm. She'd been holding Sophie's hand just minutes ago, navigating the chaotic concourse. Buddy's leash looped around her wrist. One moment of distraction, a spilled coffee, a shove from a commuter, and Sophie was gone. Emily's heart pounded as she clambered back onto the platform. Her knees scraped bloody, the train screeching to a stop inches from her. She didn't care. Her 3-year-old was somewhere in this madness, and nothing else mattered. She shoved through the sea of bodies, her eyes darting over briefcases, sneakers, and indifferent faces. "Sophie, Sophie, Sophie," she yelled, her voice hoarse, tears burning her eyes. No one stopped. No one cared. A man in a suit bumped her shoulder, muttering about delays, and she nearly swung at him. Where was Buddy? The golden retriever was supposed to stay close, his collar jangling with every step. Panic clawed her chest as she pictured Sophie alone, her tiny frame lost in the swarm. Emily sprinted toward the main concourse, her sneakers slapping the grimy tiles, her breath ragged. She didn't see Sophie crumpled on the floor 50 yards away, her pink dress smudged with dirt, or Buddy crouched beside her, his fur bristling. The dog's low growl cut through the din as a commuter stepped too close, unaware of the toddler at his feet. Buddy's ears flattened, his teeth bared, and he snapped at the air, forcing the man to stumble back. Sophie whimpered, clutching her stuffed bunny, her face streaked with tears. Buddy didn't move, his body a shield between her and the chaos. Emily, oblivious to her daughter's plight, shoved past a pretzel cart, knocking over a stack of napkins. "Has anyone seen a little girl pink dress? Blonde hair," she begged, grabbing a woman's arm. The woman yanked free, muttering about crazies, and kept walking. Emily's desperation surged, her hands shaking as she scanned the crowd. She spotted a station worker in a neon vest, his radio crackling. "Please, my daughter's missing," she gasped, clutching his sleeve. He barely glanced up, waving her off. "Lady, check lost and found. I got a job to do." Oh. Emily's vision blurred with rage and fear. She wanted to scream, to shake him, but time was slipping away. She turned, her eyes catching a flicker of movement near the escalators, a man in a hoodie, his gaze lingering too long on the concourse. Something about him felt wrong. His hands stuffed deep in his pockets, his posture too deliberate. She didn't know he was part of a crew, 3 men weaving through the crowd, their eyes locked on Sophie. The leader, a wiry guy with a scar across his cheek, nodded to his partners, his lips curling. "Easy pickings," he muttered, stepping closer to the toddler. Buddy's growl deepened, his body tensing as the man's shadow fell over Sophie. The dog's sudden bark startled a nearby woman, who dropped her phone, cursing. The noise drew a few glances, but no one intervened. Emily, still fighting through the crowd, felt a chill as she caught another glimpse of the hoodie guy. He was moving faster now, toward the center of the concourse. Her instincts screamed danger. She broke into a run, her purse slipping from her shoulder, its contents spilling across the floor. She didn't stop to pick it up. "Sophie," she shouted, her voice cracking. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows as she dodged a group of teenagers. She didn't know Buddy was holding his ground, his barks growing fiercer as the scarred man knelt, his hand reaching toward Sophie. The dog lunged, snapping at his fingers, forcing him to jerk back. "Damn mutt," the man hissed, glancing at his partners. "Get it away." One of them, a hulking figure with a shaved head, stepped forward, his hand slipping into his jacket. "Emily, now closer to the concourse, caught a snippet of a child's cry over the noise. Her heart leapt. Sophie, Sophie, she gasped, shoving a man aside. She didn't see the third pickpocket circling behind Buddy, his eyes narrowing as he calculated his move. The station's chaos was their cover, the crowd a perfect distraction. Emily's legs burned as she fought her way forward, her mind racing with images of Sophie scared, hurt. Or worse, she tripped over a suitcase, crashing to her knees, pain shooting through her shins. "Get up," she muttered to herself, scrambling to her feet. The station worker she'd begged earlier was now on his radio, his brow furrowed. But Emily didn't notice. She was focused on the concourse, where Buddy's barks echoed like gunshots. The scarred man lunged again, aiming to grab Sophie, but Buddy was faster, his jaws clamping onto the man's sleeve. The fabric tore, and the man stumbled. Cursing, a few commuters paused, their phones raised, recording the scene. "What's with that dog?" one muttered. But no one stepped in. Emily's breath caught as she finally broke through the crowd, her eyes locking on the concourse. She froze, her blood running cold. There was Sophie, tiny and terrified, curled up on the floor, and there was Buddy, hackles raised, facing down two men who didn't look like they belonged. "Sophie!" Emily screamed, her voice cutting through the noise. The scarred man's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers. For a split second, time stopped. Then he bolted, shoving through the crowd, his partner scattering. Emily ran toward her daughter, her heart pounding, unaware of the danger still circling. Buddy's growls didn't falter. His body pressed close to Sophie, ready to fight. Emily was almost there, her fingers brushing the air, when a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back. "Not so fast," a low voice snarled. She spun, facing the hulking pickpocket, his grip like iron. Without thinking, she drove her elbow into his gut, breaking free. The crowd gasped, finally noticing the chaos. Emily didn't care. She had to reach Sophie. She had to reach Buddy. She had to end this nightmare. Buddy's growl rumbled like thunder as the scarred man lunged again, his fingers grazing Sophie's arm before the golden retriever's jaws snapped shut. Catching his wrist, the man yelped, yanking back, blood seeping through his torn sleeve, his eyes blazing with fury. "Get that dog," he snarled, signaling his hulking partner, who shoved through the Penn Station crowd, his hand gripping something heavy in his jacket. Sophie clung to her stuffed bunny, her sobs muffled by the chaos, her tiny body trembling against Buddy's fur. The dog didn't flinch, his hackles raised, his body a fortress shielding the toddler from the swarm of commuters. A woman in heels tripped over a briefcase, cursing as she nearly stepped on Sophie, but Buddy's sharp bark sent her stumbling back, her coffee splattering the tiles. The crowd buzzed, some pausing to gawk, others shoving past, their indifference a wall around the unfolding danger. 50 yards away, Emily Carter sprinted through the concourse, her lungs burning, her elbow throbbing from where she'd slammed it into the hulking pickpocket's gut. She'd broken free, but his snarl echoed in her ears, a promise of retaliation. Her eyes locked on Sophie's pink dress, a beacon in the sea of gray and black, but the scarred man's crew was closing in, their movements deliberate, like wolves circling prey. Emily's heart hammered as she dodged a stroller, her sneakers skidding on a wet patch of floor. She didn't see the third pickpocket, a wiry kid with a backward cap, slipping behind a pillar, his phone pressed to his ear, muttering, "Got a kid here. Unguarded except for the mutt. Move fast." Buddy sensed the shift, his ears twitching as the hulking man stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Sophie. The dog's bark exploded, sharp and relentless, drawing a gasp from a nearby teenager who raised his phone. Filming, "Yo, that dog's wild," he shouted. But no one moved to help. The hulking man smirked, pulling a metal pipe from his jacket, its dull glint catching the station's fluorescent light. Come here, pup, he taunted, raising the weapon. Buddy didn't wait. He charged, slamming into the man's legs, his teeth sinking into the thug's calf. The pipe clattered to the ground as the man roared, staggering, blood pooling on the tiles. The crowd screamed, finally parting, some running, others frozen, their phones still recording. Emily heard the commotion, her pulse spiking as she shoved a man aside, his briefcase crashing to the floor. Sophie, she screamed, her voice raw, her eyes catching Buddy's golden fur flashing in the chaos. She was close, so close, but the scarred man wasn't done. He grabbed Sophie's arm, yanking her up, her bunny falling to the ground. Sophie's wail pierced the air, and Buddy spun, his jaws snapping at the man's leg, forcing him to drop the girl. Sophie crumpled, sobbing, and Buddy stood over to in his growls a warning to anyone who dared approach. The scarred man cursed, kicking at Buddy, but the dog dodged, his loyalty unbreakable. Emily's vision tunneled as she sprinted the final yards, her hands outstretched, but the wiry kid in the cap darted from behind the pillar, his arm wrapping around her waist, dragging her back. Not yet, lady, he hissed, his breath hot against her ear. Emily thrashed, her nails raking his face, drawing blood. He grunted, loosening his grip, and she drove her knee into his groin, sending him crumpling. She didn't look back. Her focus on Sophie, on Buddy, on the scarred man now retreating into the crowd. But the hulking thug was back on his feet, his calf bleeding, his pipe raised again. "You're dead, mutt," he roared, swinging at Buddy. The dog leaped, catching the man's arm, his weight pulling the thug down. The pipe skidded across the floor, narrowly missing a commuter's foot. The crowd was in chaos now, shouts and screams blending with the station's announcements. A security guard, alerted by the noise, pushed through, his radio crackling. "What's going on here?" he barked, his hand on his baton. Emily saw him, hope flaring, but she didn't stop. She dove towards Sophie, her fingers brushing her daughter's dress. When a new threat emerged, the scarred man's third partner, a lean figure with cold eyes, slipping through the chaos, a knife glinting in his hand. He was aiming for Buddy, who was still grappling with the hulking thug. Emily's scream caught in her throat as she lunged, tackling the knife wielder, her body slamming into his. The blade grazed her arm, pain searing, but she held on, pinning him to the ground. "Stay away from my daughter," she spat, her voice feral. The guard was closer now, his baton raised, shouting for backup. The scarred man saw the tide turning and bolted, shoving commuters aside, his partners scattering. Buddy, panting, stood firm over Sophie, his barks weaker but unwavering. Emily scrambled to her daughter, pulling Sophie into her arms, her tears mixing with the girls. "Mommy's here," she whispered, her voice shaking. But the danger wasn't over. The hulking thug, now free, grabbed the pipe again, his eyes locked on Buddy. Emily clutched Sophie, her arm bleeding, her body screaming for rest. But she couldn't stop. She kicked the pipe from the thug's hand, her strength fueled by desperation. The guard reached them, his baton swinging, driving the thug back. "Get down," he shouted, his radio blaring with calls for police. Emily held Sophie tight, her eyes on Buddy, who collapsed beside them, his fur matted with blood. "Buddy, hang on," she whispered, her heart breaking. The crowd was still filming, their phones a sea of glowing screens. But the guard's presence shifted the dynamic. The scarred man was gone. His crew dispersed, but Emily knew they weren't safe yet. She spotted something on the ground, Sophie's ribbon, bright pink, lying near the pillar where the wiry kid had ambushed her. It was a clue, a lifeline. She grabbed it, her resolve hardening. "We're getting out of here," she muttered, lifting Sophie, Buddy struggling to his feet beside her. The guard was calling for medics, his eyes scanning the crowd, but Emily's focus was singular. She had to find the scarred man. She had to end this. Emily Carter clutched Sophie tightly, her daughter's hose vibrating against her chest as she stumbled away from the chaos of Penn Station's main concourse. The pink ribbon clenched in her fist like a lifeline. Blood trickled from the piercing on her arm. The pain, a dull roar compared to the terror driving her forward. Buddy limped beside her, his fur matted with blood. His breath heavy, but his eyes still sharp, scanning the crowd for threats. The security guard's shouts faded behind them, his baton swinging as he wrestled the hulking thug to the ground. But Emily couldn't rely on him, and the scarred man and his crew had vanished into the sea of commuters, and she knew they weren't done. Sophie's ribbon, found near the pillar, wasn't just a clue, it was a taunt, proof they'd been watching her daughter. Emily's gaze darted to a rusted sign pointing to a maintenance tunnel, its flickering light barely cutting through the station's gloom. The scarred man had fled that way. She was sure of it, his silhouette disappearing into the shadows moments ago. "Hang on. Sophie," she whispered, hoisting the toddler higher, her muscles screaming. Buddy's low growl urged her on, his loyalty unwavering despite the blood seeping from his flank. Emily pushed through a cluster of commuters, their complaints drowned out by the thud of her heartbeat. The tunnel entrance loomed, a gaping maw of concrete and darkness, its air thick with the stench of oil and damp metal. She hesitated, Sophie's weight heavy in her arms, but the thought of those men circling back for her daughter crushed any doubt. She stepped inside, the station's noise fading to a muffled hum, replaced by the drip of water and the echo of her sneakers on the slick floor. Buddy's claws scraped the ground, his ears pinned back as he sniffed the air. Sensing danger, the tunnel stretched endlessly, its dim bulbs casting jagged shadows that danced like predators. Emily's breath hitched as she heard footsteps behind her, heavy, deliberate, not the hurried shuffle of a commuter. She spun, her eyes straining in the dark, but saw nothing. "Keep moving," she muttered, her voice trembling. Sophie whimpered, clutching Emily's shirt, her stuffed bunny lost somewhere in the concourse. Buddy's growl deepened, his body tensing as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Emily quickened her pace, her arm burning, the ribbon still gripped tightly. A shadow moved ahead, too fast to be a trick of the light. She froze, her heart lurching as the scarred man stepped into view, his knife glinting under a flickering bulb. "You're persistent," he sneered, his scarred cheek twitching. "Too bad it's going to cost you." Emily's instincts screamed to run, but the tunnel was a trap, its walls closing in. She set Sophie down behind her, whispering, "Stay with Buddy." The dog pressed against the toddler, his teeth bared, ready to strike. The scarred man lunged, his knife slashing the air, and Emily dove to the side, her shoulders slamming into the concrete. Pain exploded, but she scrambled up, grabbing a loose pipe from the ground. "Stay back," she shouted, swinging the pipe, its weight unsteady in her shaking hands. The man laughed, dodging easily, his blade nicking her sleeve. Buddy barked, sharp and furious. But Emily waved him back. She couldn't risk him leaving Sophie. The footsteps behind her were louder now, and panic clawed her chest as she realized they were boxed in. The wiry kid from the concourse appeared, his face scratched from Emily's nails, a crowbar in his hand. "Told you to stay out of it," he spat, advancing. Emily's mind raced, her eyes darting between the two men, the pipe her only defense. She swung at the scarred man, catching his arm. The impact jarring her bones, he grunted, stumbling. But the wiry kid was faster, his crowbar swinging toward her head. Emily ducked, the metal grazing her hair, and kicked his knee, sending him sprawling. Sophie screamed, and Buddy's barks echoed like gunfire, his body shielding the girl as the scarred man recovered, his knife raised. Emily's pipe connected with his wrist, the blade clattering to the ground. But the wiry kid was back, tackling her from behind. She hit the floor hard, her breath knocked out, the pipe rolling away. "Mommy," Sophie cried, and Buddy lunged, his jaws clamping onto the kid's leg, dragging him off Emily. The dog's strength was fading, his wounds slowing him, but he held on, giving Emily a chance to crawl to the pipe. She grabbed it, swinging wildly, catching the scarred man's shoulder as he reached for Sophie. He roared, backing off, but the wiry kid kicked Buddy, forcing the dog to release him. Emily staggered to her feet, her vision blurring, her arms slick with blood. The tunnel's darkness pressed in, the air thick with danger. She heard a new sound: boots, heavy and purposeful. Not the thug's stealthy steps. Freeze, a voice bellowed, and a flashlight beam cut through the gloom. The security guard from the concourse stormed in, his baton raised, a second guard behind him. The scarred man cursed, bolting deeper into the tunnel, the wiry kid scrambling after him. Emily collapsed against the wall, pulling Sophie into her arms, her body shaking. Buddy limped to them, his tail wagging weakly, his fur stained red. "Good boy," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. The first guard knelt beside her, his flashlight scanning her wounds. "You're hurt. Medics are coming," he said, his voice firm but kind. The second guard pursued the thugs, his radio crackling with calls for backup. Emily's grip on the ribbon tightened, its pink fabric a reminder of the fight still ahead. The scarred man was gone, but he wasn't finished. She could feel it. The tunnel's shadows hid more than just criminals, they hid secrets. And Emily knew she'd have to face them to keep Sophie safe. "We're not done," she muttered, holding her daughter close. Buddy's warmth steady beside her. The guards' radios buzzed, the sound of approaching sirens faint but growing. Emily's resolve hardened. She'd follow that ribbon, follow the scarred man, follow the danger, no matter where it led. Emily Carter's arm throbbed, the gash from the knife pulsing with every step as she clutched Sophie against her chest. The pink ribbon now stuffed into her pocket, a burning reminder of the scarred man's taunt. Buddy limped beside him, his bloodied fur a testament to his fight, but his eyes gleamed with stubborn resolve. His nose twitching as he tracked the scent of danger through Penn Station's chaos. The tunnel's darkness was behind them, the security guards' radios crackling as medics swarmed. But Emily couldn't stop not when the scarred man and his crew were still out there, their threat lingering like smoke. She pushed back into the concourse, the crowd's roar slamming into her, a wall of bodies and noise that threatened to swallow her whole. Sophie's whimpers were soft against her shoulder, her tiny hands gripping Emily's shirt, and Emily's heart ached with every sob. But she had no time for comfort. Her eyes caught a flicker on a CCTV screen above a ticket booth, grainy footage of the scarred man shoving through a crowd near the Amtrak platforms. His hoodie pulled low. "There," she whispered, her voice steel, her legs already moving before her mind caught up. Buddy's low growl echoed her resolve, his paws slapping the tiles as he kept pace, ignoring his wounds. The concourse was a maze of commuters, luggage, and vendors. But Emily weaved through, her shoulder slamming into a man who cursed, his coffee splashing her jeans. She didn't care. The scarred man was her target, and she'd tear the station apart to reach him. A security guard shouted behind her, "Ma'am, wait for the police," but his voice was lost in the din, and Emily wasn't waiting for anyone. She spotted the Amtrak signs, their neon glow cutting through the haze, and sprinted toward them. Sophie bouncing in her arms, Buddy's barks sharp and urgent. The scarred man was faster, his figure darting past a newsstand, his head turning to scan the crowd. He knew she was coming. Emily's breath burned as she dodged a group of tourists, their suitcases blocking her path. "Move!" She snapped, shoving a bag aside, her eyes locked on the hoodie disappearing into a throng near the platform escalators. Buddy surged ahead, his instincts sharper than hers, his nose low as he navigated the chaos. Emily's gaze flicked to another CCTV screen there, the scarred man again, slipping into a service corridor, his wiry partner trailing him. Her stomach twisted. They weren't just running, they were regrouping. She reached the escalators, her sneakers skidding as she took the steps two at a time, Sophie's weight straining her arms. Buddy was already at the bottom, his barks echoing off the concrete walls, drawing stares from commuters who muttered about loose dogs. Emily didn't care. She hit the platform level, the air thick with diesel fumes and the rumble of departing trains. The service corridor was ahead, its door ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. She hesitated, Sophie's warmth grounding her, but Buddy's growl pushed her forward. "Stay close," she murmured to the dog, stepping into the corridor, the door creaking shut behind her. The space was narrow, lined with pipes and flickering bulbs, the air heavy with the stench of grease. Emily's pulse raced as she heard footsteps ahead, fast and uneven. She tightened her grip on Sophie, her other hand brushing the ribbon in her pocket, its texture a spark of defiance. Buddy's ears twitched, his body tensing as a shadow moved at the corridor's end. The wiry kid stepped out, his crowbar swinging lazily, his scratched face twisted in a smirk. "You don't learn, do you?" he taunted, blocking her path. Emily's eyes narrowed, her fear buried under rage. "Get out of my way," she spat, setting Sophie down behind her. Buddy instantly pressing against the toddler, his teeth bared. The kid laughed, raising the crowbar, but Emily was ready. She lunged, grabbing his wrist, twisting until he gasped, the crowbar clattering to the ground. He swung a fist, catching her jaw, pain exploding, but she didn't falter. Driving her knee into his stomach, he doubled over, and she kicked the crowbar away, its metal scraping the concrete. Buddy barked, sharp and fierce, as the scarred man's voice echoed from deeper in the corridor. "Enough games," he shouted, emerging with a knife, his eyes cold. Emily's heart lurched, but she stood her ground, Sophie whimpering behind her, Buddy's growls a steady anchor. The scarred man charged, his blade aimed at her chest, and Emily dove, tackling him, her momentum slamming them into the wall. The knife skidded across the floor, and she punched his face, her knuckles splitting. He roared, grabbing her hair, yanking her back. But Buddy was there, his jaws snapping at the man's leg, forcing him to release her. Emily scrambled up, her vision swimming, and grabbed Sophie, pulling her into a corner. The wiry kid was back, clutching his stomach but swinging a pipe he'd found, aiming for Buddy. The dog dodged, his movements slower, his wounds draining him. Emily's scream tore through the corridor as she threw herself at the kid, her nails clawing his eyes, sending him crashing into a pipe. The scarred man was on his feet, knife in hand, but a new sound stopped in boots, heavy and rapid, accompanied by shouts. Police dropped the weapon. 2 officers burst into the corridor, their guns drawn, flashlights blinding. The scarred man hesitated, then bolted, shoving past the kid, who scrambled after him. Emily collapsed, Sophie in her arms, Buddy panting beside her, his body trembling. The officers pursued, their radios blaring, but Emily's focus was on her daughter, on the ribbon, on the fight still raging. She spotted something on the ground, a torn piece of paper near the knife, scrawled with an address. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't random. The scarred man's crew wasn't just after Sophie, they were part of something bigger. Emily tucked the paper into her pocket, her resolve hardening. "We're not done," she whispered, kissing Sophie's forehead, Buddy's warmth steady against her. The officers' shouts echoed, but Emily knew the real battle was just beginning. Emily Carter's fingers trembled as she clutched the crumpled paper with the address, its ink smudged but legible, a chilling clue that the scarred man's crew was more than just opportunistic thieves. Sophie clung to her, her tiny face buried in Emily's neck, her sobs quieter but no less desperate, while Buddy pressed against them, his bloodied fur warm, his breath shallow from the fight in the service corridor. The Penn Station concourse roared around them, a chaotic swirl of commuters, police radios, and flashing lights. But Emily's world narrowed to the weight of her daughter, the loyalty of her dog, and the burning need to end this nightmare. The police officers who'd stormed the corridor were gone, chasing the scarred man and his wiry accomplice through the station's labyrinth. But Emily knew better than to trust they'd catch them. The address in her pocket somewhere in the Bronx was proof this was bigger, darker, a web she'd stumbled into by losing Sophie. Her arm bled steadily, the knife wound a searing reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. But pain was secondary. She scanned the crowd, her eyes catching a flicker of movement, and near the subway platforms a man in a black jacket, his posture too tense, his gaze lingering on her. It wasn't the scarred man, but it wasn't random. Emily's instincts screamed, and she tightened her grip on Sophie, whispering, "We're moving, baby." Buddy's ears twitched, his limp more pronounced, but he followed, his loyalty a beacon in the chaos. Emily pushed toward the platforms, her sneakers slipping on the tiles, the crowd parting reluctantly as she shoved through, her shoulder aching from carrying Sophie. The man in the black jacket moved too, mirroring her path, his hand slipping into his pocket. Emily's heart pounded as she ducked behind a ticket kiosk, her breath ragged, her eyes darting to a security camera overhead. She needed a plan, a way to lose him. But the station was a trap, its exits too far, its crowds too dense. Buddy growled, low and guttural, his nose pointing toward the man, who was now weaving closer, his pace deliberate. Emily spotted a station map on the wall. Her mind racing, there was a staff-only stairwell nearby, leading to the lower tracks. It was risky, but it might throw him off. She bolted, Sophie bouncing in her arms, Buddy's claws scraping the floor as he kept pace. The stairwell door was unmarked, its handle cold under her palm. She shoved it open, the hinges creaking, and slipped inside. The door slamming shut behind them. The air was thick with dust, the narrow stairs descending into darkness, lit only by flickering emergency lights. Emily's pulse thundered as she took the steps, Sophie's weight straining her wounded arm, Buddy's labored breaths echoing in the confined space. She reached the bottom, a maintenance platform overlooking the tracks, the rumble of a passing train shaking the ground. The door above slammed open, footsteps pounding down the stairs. Emily crouched behind a stack of crates, Sophie pressed against her, Buddy's body tense beside them. The man in the black jacket emerged, his silhouette sharp against the dim light, a gun now visible in his hand. Emily's breath caught, her mind screaming that this wasn't just a pickpocket, this was a hunter. "Come out, lady," he called, his voice low, almost amused. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Emily's hand tightened on the ribbon in her pocket, her other arm around Sophie, who whimpered softly. Buddy's growl was barely audible, his strength fading, but his eyes burned with defiance. Emily scanned the platform, spotting a rusted wrench among the crates. She grabbed it, its weight solid, her only weapon. The man's footsteps grew closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. Emily whispered to Buddy, "Stay with Sophie," and eased the toddler behind the crates, her heart breaking at the fear in her daughter's eyes. She stood, wrench raised, and stepped into the open, facing the man. "Leave us alone," she spat, her voice steady despite the terror clawing her chest. He smirked, raising the gun, but Emily didn't wait. She swung the wrench, aiming for his wrist. The metal connected, a sickening crack echoing as the gun flew from his hand, skidding toward the tracks. He roared, lunging at her, his fist slamming into her shoulder, pain exploding where the knife had cut her. Emily stumbled, the wrench slipping, but she clawed his face, her nails drawing blood. He grabbed her throat, his grip crushing, and she gasped, her vision darkening. Buddy's bark shattered the moment, the dog launching himself at the man, his teeth sinking into his arm. The man screamed, releasing Emily, who collapsed, gasping for air. Buddy held on, his strength waning, until the man kicked him hard, sending the dog crashing into the crates. Sophie screamed, and Emily's rage surged. She grabbed the wrench, swinging it at the man's knee, dropping him to the ground. "Stay down," she shouted, her voice raw. The wrench raised for another blow. The man groaned, clutching his leg, but his eyes flicked to the gun near the tracks. Emily saw it too, diving for it as he crawled, her fingers closing around the cold metal just as he reached her. She rolled, pointing the gun at him, her hands shaking. "Don't move," she hissed, her voice trembling but fierce. The man froze, his eyes narrowing, but a new sound cut through sirens. Close now, and the thud of boots. "Police," a voice ordered, and officers stormed the platform, their flashlights blinding. Emily dropped the gun, raising her hands, her body shaking as she backed towards Sophie and Buddy. The man in the black jacket was cuffed, his curses echoing as he was dragged away. Emily pulled Sophie into her arms, tears streaming down her face, and knelt beside Buddy, who whimpered, his tail thumping weakly. The crowd above was buzzing, phones filming the chaos, clips already spreading online. Emily's hand brushed the paper in her pocket, the address, a weight she couldn't ignore. The police were here, but the scarred man was still out there, and this fight was far from over. "We're okay," she whispered to Sophie, kissing her forehead, but her eyes were hard, fixed on the tracks, on the darkness beyond. Emily Carter's hands shook as she clutched Sophie, the toddler's warmth anchoring her against the storm of fear and adrenaline raging in her chest, the crumpled paper with the Bronx address burning a hole in her pocket. Buddy lay panting beside her, his bloodied fur matted, his eyes half closed but still flickering with defiance, his loyalty unshaken despite the wounds from their battle on the maintenance platform. Penn Station's concourse pulsed around them, a chaotic blur of police lights, shouting officers, and gawking commuters, their phones raised, filming the aftermath of the fight that had nearly cost Emily everything. The man in the black jacket was gone, hauled away in cuffs, but the scarred man and his wiry accomplice were still out there, shadows in the station's labyrinth, and Emily knew they weren't random thugs. The address wasn't just a clue, it was a key to a darker truth, one she couldn't ignore. Her arm throbbed, the knife wound now bandaged by a medic who tried to pull her to an ambulance, but Emily had refused. Her eyes locked on the crowd, searching for the next threat. Sophie whimpered, her tiny fingers clutching Emily's shirt, and Emily kissed her forehead, whispering, "We're okay, baby," though the lie tasted bitter. They weren't okay, not yet. A security guard approached, his face grim, his radio crackling with updates. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. NYPD's got questions," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Emily's gaze flicked to his badge, Officer Daniels, the same guard who'd stormed the tunnel earlier, his baton still clipped to his belt. She nodded, her mind racing. Daniels wasn't like the others. He'd seen the scarred man's knife, heard Sophie's screams. He was her best shot. "I need to know what's going on," she said, her voice low, handing him the paper. "This was with them. It's not just about my daughter." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he scanned the address, his jaw tightening. "This is bad," he muttered, glancing at the crowd. "Stay close." Emily hoisted Sophie, ignoring the pain shooting through her arm, and followed Daniels, Buddy limping beside her, his tail low but moving. The guard led them through a side door into a restricted security office, its walls lined with monitors showing grainy CCTV feeds. The room smelled of stale coffee and sweat, a stark contrast to the concourse's chaos. Daniels locked the door, his hand resting on his radio. "You're in deep," he said, pointing to the paper. "This address, it's tied to a trafficking ring. Been on our radar. But they're ghosts. Your kid wasn't a random target." Emily's blood ran cold, her grip on Sophie tightening. "Trafficking," she whispered, the word a knife in her gut. Daniels nodded, pulling up a file on a computer, images of missing kids flashing across the screen, their faces hauntingly young. "They hit busy places like this. Snatch kids, move 'em fast. That crew you tangled with, they're muscle for someone bigger." Emily's mind reeled, the scarred man's sneer flashing in her memory, his knife glinting in the tunnel. Sophie wasn't just lost, she was prey. Buddy growled softly, sensing her tension. His body pressed against her leg. Daniels leaned in, his voice low. We've got a lead on their hideout, but it's off the books. I can get you there, but it's dangerous. Emily's heart pounded, fear warring with resolve. She didn't trust the system, not after the station worker who'd brushed her off, not after the crowd that filmed but didn't help. But Daniels was different, and she had no choice. I'm in, she said, her voice steel. Daniels nodded, grabbing a vest from a locker. Put this on. We move now. Emily slipped the vest over her shirt, its weight grounding her, and followed Daniels out a back exit, Sophie in her arms, Buddy trailing despite his wounds. The exit led to a service alley, its walls graffitied, the air thick with diesel. A police van waited, its engine idling. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, Emily and Sophie in the back, Buddy collapsing beside them, his breath ragged. The van peeled out, weaving through Manhattan's streets, the city's lights blurring past. Emily's hand brushed the ribbon in her pocket, its pink fabric a reminder of why she was fighting. The van stopped near a derelict warehouse in the Bronx, its windows boarded, the address matching the paper. Daniels killed the engine, his eyes scanning the shadows. This is it, he whispered, handing Emily a flashlight. Stay behind me. They slipped out, the night air cold, the warehouse looming like a predator. Buddy's ears twitched, his growl low as they approached a side door, its lock broken. Daniels pushed it open, his gun drawn, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air inside was heavy, reeking of mildew and fear. Crates lined the walls, some marked with strange symbols. Emily's pulse raced as she heard a muffled cry, childlike, terrified. Sophie stirred, and Emily shushed her. Her eyes locked on Daniels. He signaled her to stay back, but Buddy was already moving, his nose low, leading them toward the sound. They reached a locked room, its doors steel, the cries louder now. Daniels kicked it open, revealing a horrifying sight: cages, small and rusted, holding several children, their faces pale, eyes wide. Emily's stomach churned, her rage boiling. The scarred man stood in the center, a gun in his hand. His wiry accomplice beyed him. You're late, he sneered, aiming at Daniels. Emily acted on instinct, shoving Sophie behind a crate. Buddy guarding her. Daniels fired, the shot grazing the scarred man's shoulder. But the wiry kid tackled him, the gun skidding across the floor. Emily lunged for it, her fingers closing around the handle as the scarred man charged, his fist slamming into her jaw. Pain exploded, but she fired, the bullet hitting his leg, dropping him. Buddy leaped, his teeth sinking into the wiry kid's arm, dragging him off Daniels. The children screamed, and Emily kicked the scarred man's gun away, her vision swimming. Daniels was up, cuffing the wiry kid, but the scarred man crawled toward a knife, his eyes blazing. Emily aimed the gun, her hand steady despite the pain. Don't, she warned, her voice deadly. He froze, and Daniels cuffed him, the children's cries filling the air. Emily ran to Sophie, pulling her close, Buddy limping to her side, his strength nearly gone. The truth was clear, this wasn't just about Sophie, it was about all of them, and Emily wouldn't stop until every child was safe. Emily Carter's breath rasped in her throat as she held Sophie close, the toddler's trembling body pressed against her, the air in the Bronx warehouse thick with the stench of rust and fear. Buddy lay panting at her feet, his bloodied fur barely rising with each labored breath, his eyes fixed on the scarred man, now cuffed but still glaring with venom, his leg bleeding from Emily's gunshot. Officer Daniels wrestled the wiry accomplice to the ground, the steel cuffs clicking shut, but the cries of the caged children echoed through the warehouse, a haunting chorus that fueled Emily's rage. The flashlight in her hand shook, its beam cutting through the shadows. illuminating the rusted cages where terrified faces peered out, their eyes wide with hope and dread. She'd stopped the scarred man, but the warehouse felt alive with danger, its shadows hiding more than she could see. Daniel's radio crackled, his voice sharp as he called for backup, medics, and child services. But Emily's instincts screamed that this wasn't over. The scarred man's sneer, even in cuffs, was too confident, too knowing. "You think this ends here," he spat, his voice low, his scarred cheek twitching. Emily's grip on the gun tightened, her arms screaming from the knife wound. But she didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on his. "Shut up," she hissed, stepping closer, the weapon steady despite her shaking hands. Sophie whimpered, clutching Emily's leg, and Buddy growled, his strength fading but his spirit unbroken. Daniels yanked the scarred man up, shoving him against a crate, but a sudden crash shattered the moment a metal door at the warehouse's far end burst open, and 3 new figures stormed in, their faces masked, guns glinting in the dim light. Down Daniels shouted, diving behind a crate, pulling Emily and Sophie with him. Bullets tore through the air, splintering wood, the children's screams piercing the chaos. Buddy barked, his voice hoarse, dragging himself to shield Sophie, his body trembling with effort. Emily's heart pounded as she peeked over the crate, the masked men spreading out, their movements precise, professional. These weren't the scarred man's lackeys, they were enforcers, sent to clean up. The scarred man laughed, his cuffs rattling. "Told you," he taunted, ducking as a stray bullet grazed the crate. Emily's mind raced, her eyes scanning the warehouse for an escape, but the children's cages were in the open, vulnerable. She couldn't leave them. Daniels. "The kids," she whispered, her voice urgent. He nodded, his gun raised, firing a shot that caught one masked man in the shoulder. Dropping him, the other 2 returned fire, their bullets pinging off metal, forcing Emily to duck. Sophie's sobs muffled against her chest. Buddy's growls grew weaker, his body slumping, and Emily's heart broke. She couldn't lose him. Not after everything. She crawled to the nearest cage, her fingers fumbling with the lock, the gun still in her other hand. A girl inside, no older than 10, pressed against the bars, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered, and Emily's resolve hardened. She shot the lock, the recoil jarring her wounded arm, and the cage door swung open. "Run to the crates," she ordered, helping the girl out as Daniels fired again, keeping the masked men pinned. The second masked man lunged toward the cages, his gun aimed at Emily, but Buddy summoned his last strength, launching himself at the man's legs, his teeth sinking into flesh. The man screamed, stumbling, his gun firing wildly, the bullet grazing Emily's thigh. Pain seared, but she didn't stop, shoving the girl toward Daniels and turning to the next cage. The third masked man was closing in, his gun trained on her, but Daniels tackled him, their bodies crashing into a stack of crates, wood splintering. Emily shot another lock, freeing 2 more children, their small hands grabbing hers as they ran for cover. The scarred man, still cuffed, kicked at Daniels as he passed, slowing him, and the wiry accomplice writhed, trying to break free. Emily's vision blurred, blood seeping from her thigh, but she kept moving, her gun now empty, her only weapon her will. The first masked man, wounded but alive, staggered up, his gun raised, and Emily dove, shielding the children with her body. Buddy, barely conscious, dragged himself toward her, his barks faint but fierce. The man's finger tightened on the trigger, but a deafening shot rang out not from him, but from the warehouse entrance. A SWAT team stormed in, their rifles sweeping the room, their shouts drowning the chaos. "Drop it," their leader bellowed, and the masked man hesitated, then fell. A bullet in his leg. The SWAT team swarmed, cuffing the remaining enforcers, securing the scarred man and his accomplice. Emily collapsed, pulling Sophie and the freed children close, her body shaking, her thigh bleeding heavily. Daniel staggered to his feet, his face bruised but alive, directing the team to the cages. Medics rushed in, their kits clanking, and one knelt beside Buddy, checking his wounds. "He's tough," the medic muttered, starting an IV, and Emily's tears fell, her hand stroking Buddy's fur. Sophie clung to her, silent now, her eyes wide but safe. The SWAT leader approached, his face grim. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, glancing at the children, now wrapped in blankets, their faces all but hopeful. Emily nodded, her voice gone, her hand brushing the ribbon in her pocket. The scarred man was dragged away, his taunts silenced, but his words lingered. This wasn't the end. Not for the ring he served. Daniels knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You did good," he said, his voice soft. Emily looked at Sophie, at Buddy, at the children being led to safety, and felt a flicker of strength. She'd fought for her daughter, for all of them, and she'd won this battle, but the war wasn't over. The address, the cages, the masked men, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, and Emily knew she'd face it, for Sophie, for Buddy, for every child still out there. Emily Carter's body ached, every muscle screaming as she held Sophie tightly. The toddler's warmth a lifeline in the cold, cavernous Bronx warehouse, now swarming with SWAT officers, medics, and child services workers. Buddy lay beside her, his bloodied fur stabilized by an IV, his eyes half open but gleaming with the same fierce loyalty that had carried them through the nightmare. The scarred man and his enforcers were gone, hauled away in cuffs, their taunts silenced by the clang of police van doors. But the echoes of the caged children's cries still haunted Emily. Their pale faces burned into her memory. Her thigh throbbed, the bullet grazed bandaged but stinging, her arm heavy from the knife wound. Yet none of it mattered as she kissed Sophie's forehead, whispering, "You're safe, baby." The warehouse was a hive of activity, officers photographing crates, medics wrapping blankets around shivering children, their small voices mingling with the crackle of radios. Officer Daniels stood nearby, his face bruised but calm, directing the chaos with steady commands, his vest scuffed from the fight. Emily's hand brushed the pink ribbon in her pocket, its fabric worn but unbroken, a symbol of the fight she'd won for Sophie, for Buddy, for the kids now being led to safety. A medic knelt beside her, checking Sophie's pulse, her gentle voice coaxing a shy nod from the toddler. "She's okay, just shaken," the medic said, then glanced at Buddy. "This dog's a hero. We'll get him to a vet. Top priority." Emily's tears welled, her fingers stroking Buddy's fur, his tail thumping weakly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. Daniels approached, his expression soft but serious. "You saved those kids," he said, nodding toward the group, some clinging to social workers, others staring blankly, their ordeal far from over. "NYPD's raiding other sites because of you. That address, it broke the case wide open." Emily nodded, her throat tight, the weight of his words sinking in. She'd stumbled into a trafficking ring, faced death, and come out with her daughter. But the victory was bittersweet. Those children's eyes, so like Sophie's, would stay with her forever. A SWAT officer interrupted, handing Daniels a phone. "Press is outside," he said. "They got wind of the rescue. Crowds growing." Emily's stomach twisted. She'd seen the phones at Penn Station, filming her fight, turning her pain into clicks. Daniel shook his head. "Keep 'em out. These kids need peace." Emily's respect for him grew. He wasn't just a guard, he was a shield. Like Buddy. The medic helped her stand, Sophie still in her arms, and they moved toward a waiting ambulance. Buddy carried on a stretcher, his whimper soft but steady. The night air hit her as they stepped outside, the Bronx's gritty streets alive with flashing lights and murmurs from a gathering crowd, some holding signs, others shouting support. Emily shielded Sophie's face, her heart swelling at the sight strangers, Not filming, but cheering. Their voices a stark contrast to the station's indifference. A woman pushed forward, her eyes teary. "You're that mom from the station," she said, handing Emily a teddy bear for Sophie. "We saw the videos. You're a hero." Emily shook her head, her voice barely audible. "It was Buddy and Daniels." The woman smiled, touching her arm, and Emily felt a spark of connection, a reminder that not everyone turned away. The ambulance ride back to Manhattan was quiet, Sophie asleep against her, Buddy stabilized in a vet's care beside them. Emily's mind replayed the day, the station's chaos, the tunnel's terror, the warehouse's horror, but also the moments of hope, Buddy's barks, Daniel's courage, the children's hands reaching for freedom. At the hospital, Sophie was checked and released, her bruises minor, her spirit bruised but intact. Emily sat by her friend, watching her sleep, the ribbon now tied gently in Sophie's hair. Daniels visited, his arm in a sling, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Buddy's gonna make it," he said, tough as nails. Emily's tears fell, relief flooding her. "And the kids?" she asked. Daniels nodded. "Safe. Reunion starting. You gave them that." Emily's chest ached, pride and pain intertwined. She thought of the crowd at Penn Station, their phones raised, their apathy a wall yet here. In the aftermath, people had shown up, offered help, proved humanity wasn't lost. Days later, Emily returned to Penn Station, Sophie's hand in hers, Buddy at her side, his wounds healing, his collar jangling. The concourse was the same, crowded, loud, indifferent, but Emily was different. She was stronger, forged in fire. Her love for Sophie and Buddy, a shield against the world. A newsstand displayed a headline, "Hero Mom and Dog Bust Trafficking Ring." Emily ignored it, her focus on Sophie's giggle as Buddy nuzzled her. They boarded a train, not to escape but to move forward, the station's lights fading behind them. The ribbon in Sophie's hair caught the sunlight, a promise of resilience. Emily vowed to keep fighting not just for her family, but for every child still out there, their voices unheard. As the train pulled away, Buddy's warmth beside her, Sophie's hand in hers, Emily felt peace, fragile but real, a light in the darkness they'd conquered. A mother's desperate search ends in a tearful reunion, thanks to a heroic dog, Buddy, and brave security. Thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest thrilling tales.